And in the travel industry, we'd say like, well, how could I possibly work in the travel industry? My background's in nutrition. Well, guess what? Headline news, folks. Two of the top trends in travel now, because I go to these big travel conferences, are culinary travel. People want the cooking class. They want to tour the cheese making place. They want to meet the local chefs. Okay.
Yeah.
Huge trend. I don't care if you're in Norway or if you're in wherever you are, Peru. And then the other big trend, and again, this is where we, with our background and our training in food and nutrition, the other huge mega trend is wellness. Wellness in travel. I'm not talking of just like, oh, I went to the spa, but the entire experience of building the menus, giving people menu items and beverages that may promote sleep. Sleep is the new luxury.
Well, hey there. Welcome to Media Savvy, the podcast that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to get noticed by media and become the go-to expert that they keep coming back to. I'll be sitting down with successful writers, producers, and entrepreneurs to learn the tools and tactics they use to build their reputation and in turn boost their business. I'm your host, Taub-Dix, and I've been working with top-tier media outlets for more than 30 years, anywhere from traditional print publications to online and social platforms. And I'm sharing my nutrition guidance without gimmicks. But you don't have to be a dietitian for this podcast to speak to you. Through my one-to-one conversations, you'll learn how to build a strategy to get your name in the news and establish yourself as an authority in your field, no matter what the industry. With Media Savvy, I'm on a mission to inspire, motivate, and empower you to have the confidence and tools you need to shine in the spotlight. Are you ready? Let's get Media Savvy. Well, hello there. Welcome to Media Savvy Podcast. My name is Taub-Dix, and today's guest is Carolyn O'Neil. And if you've been in this field for more than 5 minutes, you know exactly why I call her a powerhouse. Carolyn does it all. National television, award-winning journalism, best-selling books, and now a stunning second career focused on luxury travel and the cultural stories behind the foods that we love. You'll hear she is sharp, she's funny, she's smart, and just one of those greats. And I'm so lucky to have her as my longtime friend and colleague. So Carolyn, welcome to Media Savvy.
Oh, Bonnie, I jumped at the chance to talk to you, and how fun that we could do this way and just really talk about media savvy. I mean, I can remember before we were even using the term media. Okay.
Oh,
that's how long we've been in the game.
I know.
Back then it was like, what did media mean? It meant like you went to a museum, an art museum. They say, oh, what media did you use? Was it oil? Was it watercolor?
I think that's medium.
Oh, well, okay. Well, whatever. So, but anyway, we were television before television was cool, and now it's not cool anymore because now we call it video.
I actually remember the first time you interviewed me, which was when we first met, and it was on CNN, and I'll never forget it. And I had just given a big presentation at fancy big convention about nutrition and AIDS. And I was one of the first dietitians to speak about this topic. And you were a wonderful interviewer. And I actually learned a very important media lesson that day. So here's what happened is I gave the interview and then I called my husband when, I got done and I said, how was it? And he said, well, the interview was great, but you look so sad. You look like you were just diagnosed. And I remember that I did look sad, but what I learned is that there is so much bad news that we hear about on the news, but commentators don't look like they're ready to cry, so you don't have to really look like you're super sad when you're telling a sad story, even though I know that that's hard to do. But anyway, what do you remember about that day? Like, what stands out to you?
I want to help you do a little healing from that memory that you have, because you didn't look sad to me. You were appropriately concerned, empathetic, and shared the worries of the audience. The patients had been diagnosed with AIDS, were dealing with AIDS, were afraid of getting AIDS. That was appropriate. Could you have smiled and said, "Oh, we just found out something about this food or nutrition or nutrient that can help"? Okay, yeah. And you probably did that. What we're hopeful for is, but the point is that was appropriate, very appropriate.
Well, thank you. You made me feel better. You see, that's like when I found out that I thought I was never invited to my high school prom. And I found out years later that we never had a prom because my class thought we were too cool for a prom. So it made me feel better. Thank you. You just made me feel better.
Oh my gosh, I didn't go to the prom either. And that
You
was
didn't?
before. No. And that was before, how now, gals or guys, whatever, will just go in groups, right? They'll go and like, "Hey,
Yeah.
we're going to prom." And because that's how usually in high school you hang out now with your gang, with your group. But back then you kind of had to wait for the guy to call you to invite you to the prom. So, and this might lead to the luxury travel thing, which we'll get to in a little while. I think because I didn't go to the prom, which was a big party, in high school, I think I've been trying to make up for that my entire life and going to every single party that I have to dress up for anywhere in the world.
Well, okay. You know what? I like that. And you don't even need a date. How do you like that? Well, you and I both earned our stripes in what we could call like the pre-Instagram, pre-social media era, when credibility mattered more than hashtags. So we know what it was like to build a media career back then. But what lessons from those days do you think still holds true for today?
Okay. Well, first of all, why did we go into media? And I think what holds true today is it's public health, nutrition, education. The reason I wanted to study media, the reason I wanted to study communications, and I went to Boston University and I got a master's degree in nutrition, so full on nutrition, but with a specialization in communication through BU's, communications coursework as well. But, it really was learning how to educate using a not just the flannel board, not just the chalkboard, not just the classroom, that the media became radio, television, newsletters, were the instruments, I guess, of our education. And so that's what has not changed and shouldn't change. End of the day, I believe if you are a registered dietitian, nutritionist, or another nutrition professional with a master's in nutrition or whatever, PhD, part of our responsibility, I think, is to share that knowledge with people to improve their lives, to seek optimal health, but meet them where they are, be really respectful of their, personal health goals, needs, wants, food preferences, you name it. But, which is actually, when you think about it, the greatest teachers through time understood, even when they looked in that classroom, whether you're teaching mathematics or science or geography, you had to communicate in many different ways to reach those students. Some might be visual learners, like, "Oh, I see what, they wrote on the board." Some might be auditory learners, like, "Oh, I heard what they said about that." Some, even more difficult to reach, they need to write it down themselves or work on a project themselves. And you think about cooking that we do, or shopping, or all the actions that people get involved, putting a bag lunch together, all the actions. That's where I think other people have that kind of learning, which is experiential. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, you can combine all of that. End of the day, that's just good teaching.
Well, I think I'm glad that you mentioned other disciplines like math or whatever, because this podcast really, my heart, of course, is in dietetics, but it really is for anyone who is a credentialed professional. And the reason why I say credentialed is because there are so many influencers out there that are also disseminating information that really shouldn't be, because it's not really based upon science and not really credible. So I think that, one thing that you said, which is what I have said a million times, people are probably bored of hearing it already, is that you have to speak in the language of your audience. So that it's so important that you know who you're talking to, not just your subject matter. And I think it's a mistake a lot of people make where they know what they're talking about and they just want to talk about it, but they don't think about who they're talking to and how to reach their audience.
Well, and that's not that easy to do. I mean, look at me, I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, can I talk to the audience of cool teenagers today or Gen Z? I don't know, but I can certainly listen, and I can listen to what it is they seem confused about, what's bothering them, what they want. Oh, I want, good skin. That just seems to be something that has like emerged as one of the hot buttons with the younger generation who have good skin. They're still young. And then you mentioned influencers, and as credentialed nutrition professionals, yes, it can make us a little bit upset when we see misinformation, even disinformation in social media about food and nutrition, because two things worry me. People are maybe wasting money, and the food dollar has
Yeah.
never been more important than today with, people's struggles in the economy. It's always been important, not to waste your money. And the other thing is protecting your body. So protecting your body and your budget. So obviously your body, if you're going to be eating a certain way or cutting out whole food groups, what are you doing? How are you harming your health?
Yeah.
So rather than, here's what I decided, kind of a bit of a secret weapon in a way, not really, rather than trying to compete with these influencers who often have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, what I've stepped up and tried to do is collaborate. And again, it's not going to work with everybody, but I have reached out to some of these content creators, influencers who are playing in our playground, so to speak, nutrition education, and said, hey, I'm a dietitian, and rather getting mad at them, like, you told people, that I'm making this up, that this is a source of vitamin C and it clearly is not. No, no, no. It's like, oh my gosh, it looks like you're so enthusiastic about health and nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian and I don't need to be on your show or anything, but I would love whatever information you need. Let's say you're working on a show on gluten. Wouldn't you want to know the latest hot things to make sure you communicate about that? You know what I'm saying? Rather
Yeah.
than criticizing, let's collaborate. And I
know exactly what you mean. In
don't
fact, I did a few podcasts ago. It was a solo podcast. Sorry, I don't remember which episode it was. I could put it in the show notes, but I talked about exactly that and about how maybe even mentoring someone and then collaborating with them and reaching out to, because your competitors really could be your collaborators. And you never know, maybe they're really skilled at doing a video. Like for me, oh my gosh, it takes me hours to do like a really good reel or something with Canva. It could take me forever to do a design on Canva, or it could take someone like that 20 minutes. Well, collaborating with someone like that, where you have the facts and the smarts that you're putting through, and they really have a lot of the skills, and the savvy, you never know. So it could be a great collaboration. I agree. And I think that one thing that you and I have also done, I know there's going to be a lot of patting ourselves on the back.
I know, but it's fun going back into all this history. You can learn along the way from us, folks. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Goodbye. No, well, we have really learned to be relevant and keeping up with the changes, and we had to. Like one thing that I really marvel at is that how a lot of the younger dietitians and a lot of, yes, even these influencers, that they really do such fabulous work in terms of just their media skills. So, what do you think about like how nutrition messages are told now? Like, have you seen some really cool stuff out there? I'm sure you have.
Well, a couple things, and this may not be in order of importance, just in order of like what strikes me. And you're free to laugh, everybody, but I can't believe how much eating on camera is going on. Everybody seems to be picking up the food, picking up the drink, drinking it. Oh, delicious. Oh, or like biting into it and doing this whole thing, or even with the sounds of it, which is a whole deal, on TikTok. And I'm like, oh my God, we used to think that was like bad manners. Okay.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to eat in front of somebody. Even when we did a food demo. I mean, if you were with a class, let's all taste this now and see if we can, let's say we were cutting the sodium on something. Let's taste this now and see with a little bit of lemon on it. Did it actually kind of feel like it has a little bit more salt than it actually does. I get that. But the eating on camera is something that I still struggle with, because when I was at CNN, and I was at CNN for almost 20 years, I covered food, nutrition, and cuisine. And of course, that meant I was in everything from farms, fields to fine dining. And I don't remember ever having cutaways, if you will, or B-roll, if you will, of me eating. You'd never see that. Unless I was with a chef and I was interviewing him or her, and they said, "Oh, have a taste of this and tell me what you think about haggis." Okay, and then you get to respond like, "Oh, not as bad as I thought," So that's one thing that I think is radically changed, but they are super creative. And again, not just hands in pans, right? Or we had like the cook, the counter, the camera, you got to break that, like where they're all over the place and they got different angles and maybe two cameras going, like, here I'm on the laptop. I could have my iPhone set up there for like this shot as well. So I think that what that does is, it's a battle to keep the audience's attention, because there's so many screens that people could scroll to. So that's what it is. I think the competition is steeper as well. Maybe we didn't need to be as good because there wasn't as much competition.
I think the eating on camera really bothers me too. Not so much because they're eating, but it really bothers me when all of these dietitians are showing how much candy they eat or how many cakes they could eat, or they're not, I get it. I get it that we're all about all foods can fit. But I don't know. There are some that really regularly show like really rich dishes and stuff. And I don't think that that's really necessary. It's funny. You brought me back to, I remember that I once did a TV show with a reporter in a restaurant to show what I would order off the menu, and then we had to eat.
Yeah,
and
really
I remember that
segments.
I didn't want to pick a salad because I didn't want my lettuce to be falling on my face.
Yeah.
But yet I wanted to pick a salad because it was so good to pick. So I had to pick one, and I was like cutting it up into really small pieces. But I remember that. I'm sure you did plenty of that stuff.
Hey, well, listen, it's not easy to talk and chew. You're not supposed to talk with your, with your mouth full and, all that kind of stuff. So you would have to pick something that was just like a tiny bite so you can get back to communicating again, unless what you're seeing is like, oh, savoring, chewing, savoring sounds, crinkling the package in front of the microphone. And again, it's to keep the audience's attention focused on you. So again, I'll just get back to teaching. I'm sure teachers in the classroom have to resort to all kinds of things to keep the attention of these students, and I've taught undergrad, at the university level. And that took a little bit of circus tricks too, just to keep their attention.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. But you have always had a signature mix of science, style, and of course some sparkle. But could you just tell my audience how you have kept your voice of authenticity? Because we know that when we're giving our messages, we want to be able to be sincere and real. And especially when you're working with a brand, you want to be able to be authentic because you're trying to promote their product in a very relatable way. So what are some tips do you have about authenticity?
Well, I try to avoid that whole feeling of, let's say you are working with a brand, and of course we're going to choose brands we're enthusiastic about to begin with, that there's attributes of the food or the beverage or whatever it is that we think people need to know about because it can help improve their health. But I'm always cognizant of not sounding like, oh, have I told you how excited I am about Amway products? Let's go to the flip chart, because you can sound so super like sketch. Okay. And, oh, have I told you how excited I am about, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I think I have a couple of key phrases, which are really important because of course, disclosure, to say, I'm excited to be working with the good people at such and such because this brand X delivers three things that I think really can make a difference, and then you say the three things or whatever it is. And for some reason, people have decided that three is the lucky number. And when you're communicating, oh, I can tell you why. This is funny. So years ago, I remember I was doing an interview with somebody. I was the interviewer. I was a reporter, and they started out like this. They go, "All right. So anyway, the four things to remember about whatever it was we were talking about." And one, two, and then they couldn't remember the fourth one. Okay. So it was like, and I through the years at CNN, it wasn't live. So of course we didn't use it to embarrass the person, but through the years, I always kept these like a blooper reel of things when people kind of messed up like that. One of my favorite bloopers, and again, this is a CNN story, and I didn't have much control over this because I hired a video crew in Boston to interview a weight control researcher at MIT. And of course, I wrote down the questions for, the stringer producer to ask the PhD researcher guy. And anyway, so it was awesome. I'm listening to it, the whole thing. Then I get the tape and I look at it, and right behind me, I have bookshelves, right? Well, behind him was a box of Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, really clearly the logo. And I'm thinking to myself, did the photographer, the producer, did they not notice that behind the guy talking about really elevated concepts in, genetics and weight management has a Dunkin' Donut box behind his head?
Oh my gosh.
Those are the things, or like a restroom sign. Maybe one time I interviewed a woman at the researcher, happened to be a woman at the Centers for Disease Control, and she didn't like her office, so she borrowed her boss's office. And again, we didn't notice, but behind her, of course, family photos, of his family. Okay, so it's just like, look at the background, folks. And I don't care if you're doing a video in your kitchen, because I've seen this too of dietitians or other communicators in the kitchen doing the food. The food looks great, and there's some kind of dirty dish towel in the background or something too. Again, you want to keep your audience focused on your message, not distracted by the dirty dish towel, which then they might be a little suspect of your food safety habits or, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Even, and I've talked about this so many times, the clothing you wear. I would never wear this for a media interview, even though I know that reporters these days are wearing, whatever, stars, stripes, sleeveless, it doesn't matter. I just go by whatever I was taught before because I think it makes a difference. Because
no, Bon, you have a signature. You have signature animal print, my girl. You are and you roar into that. You roar into your signature animal print. Just like all of Rod Stewart's wives, they always have the animal print. Now, speaking of behind me, I just noticed this. Let me grab her. Oh my gosh, I keep her here in my office, but I call her Dietitian Barbie. Okay.
Oh gosh, that's so cute. A lab coat?
It's a lab coat. Okay. Now, I don't think she wasn't this is Mattel, a real Barbie. She wasn't marketed as Dietitian Barbie, but I guess she's still doing her internship. She's got her lab coat and she's got her safety glasses, but it was Science Barbie. Oh, and look, she has sensible shoes on.
Sensible shoes.
But anyway,
yes.
Speaking of
background
things, that's me. Here, this is me. I am a Dietitian Barbie.
Yeah, I remember wearing a lab coat, and I actually had to wear a uniform, white shoes, all that stuff. And I remember one day on my way to work, I got a flat tire. So I actually took car mechanics classes, and I knew how to fix my own tire.
Oh, powder puff mechanics.
So I got to work and I had tread marks all over my white shoes, my white stockings. I looked like I really worked in a garage. But anyway, that's another story.
Oh,
so let's talk for a second about reinvention. So you have pivoted into the world of luxury travel, whether it's, cultural food traditions or the role of pleasure in eating, which actually we always talk about. So you've always been kind of global, but also grounded. So how do you connect travel and storytelling with then working with the media? Because I know that I have traveled a lot and written stories about being a vegetarian in China and all this kind of stuff. But tell me a little bit about what you're doing and with your travel, how you're conveying that through media.
All right. That's super good and super duper important. So, um, food and nutrition. I mean, you can't really talk about food without talking about global agriculture, global food habits. I mean, obviously, when we have the opportunity to travel someplace like Paris, or maybe we're in Rome, and the first thing, of course, all of us think about, because we were focused on food and nutrition, if you're a nutrition professional, it's like, oh, I wonder what they have on the menu here, right? And the name of my show on CNN was On the Menu. And it was CNN's weekly program on food, nutrition, and cuisine. And often we would travel, of course, to do stories, not just to, let's say, University at Texas Health Science Center to find out the latest on cholesterol and heart health, but go to, oh, I don't know. Do you think this sounds interesting? Maybe a half hour on the cooking school vacations of Tuscany.
Not so
And
bad.
again, I get back to this being a good teacher. If you can get them into the classroom, and could I have stood in a grocery store aisle and held up a bottle of olive oil? Yes, of course. And that can be very compelling. But can I stand in a grove of olive trees and then interview a chef about cooking with olive oil at a cooking school in Tuscany? Yeah. Now, of course, I was with CNN. We had the budget to do that. But this also shows that when you're on vacation, when you're on holiday, when you're on these trips, there's so many ways that you can use these journeys, these adventures, these discoveries as a teachable moment, Now, when On the Menu, that was on the air for about 15 or so years on CNN, I can't believe it. Gosh, that's longer than MASH was on. And then I became like the senior, whatever it is, anchor or correspondent for CNN Travel Now. And I was a little sad because On the Menu went away, and then they said, oh, we want you to do the travel show now. I guess I thought I was good on TV, blah, 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 whatever. And then I realized, wait a minute, you can't do food without travel. You certainly can't do travel without food. So then the new world of CNN Travel Now became a lot more food focused than it had in the past because of me. And also I felt like I had a background in that. I had education in that, It
Yeah.
wasn't just somebody going, oh, wow, what do you eat here, in your country, kind of a thing. And then look fast forward at CNN after I left. I was there about 20 years. Then they had Stanley Tucci, of course, Anthony Bourdain and his show, traveling the world and eating food. He wasn't so much talking about nutrition. And then Stanley Tucci, of course, with his, eating Italy and all that jazz. He wasn't really talking about nutrition, but every once in a while he would, talk about olive oil and heart health or something. But so, I don't know where I'm going with this, except to bring it to today.
I connected with how you connect your trips to what you actually like.
And
Do you
I
write
also
stories?
want to make the point for those of you listening that are really, really excited about travel and the global food message, culinary travel. This is what we're talking about. We talk about culinary nutrition, culinary travel. And in the travel industry, we'd say like, well, how could I possibly work in the travel industry? My background's in nutrition. Well, guess what? Headline news, folks. Two of the top trends in travel now, because I go to these big travel conferences, are culinary travel. People want the cooking class. They want to tour the cheese making place. They want to meet the local chefs. Okay.
Yeah.
Huge, huge trend. I don't care if you're in Norway or if you're in wherever you are, Peru. And then the other big trend, and again, this is where we, with our background and our training in food and nutrition, the other huge mega trend is wellness. Wellness in travel. I'm not talking of just like, oh, I went to the spa, but the entire experience of building the menus, giving people menu items and beverages that may promote sleep. Sleep is the new luxury. People are planning trips where they can relax and they can sleep. Or I was just recently in the Turks and Caicos at an Amman property. Amman has beautiful resorts all over the world, very expensive, but very beautifully done. And here's an example of their wellness. They take it seriously. When you're at the beach, there's no pumping music coming from the beach bar. It's just the sound of waves and birds, and people can listen to music in their own earbuds if they want to. They don't need to pound this like, you know, uh, crazy beach music and to ruin your day. So there's an opportunity for, I think, nutrition professionals to really get more credentials in the culinary nutrition, which would then make them a good potential employee, staff member, team member for some of these large hotel chains and travel groups.
Yeah, whenever I take a trip, and I like to travel so much, I always take food tours. And I have very often written stories related to the food tours that I take, because when you take a food tour, they're not just saying, oh, the best croissants are at this bakery in Paris. They talk about the history of the neighborhood. And to me, like, it paints such a picture of what happened way before us and how that all evolved and how this came about. So I think that even taking food tours really can give you fuel for stories that you do. And also I want to say, you don't have to be on CNN or write for a major newspaper to make this happen. You could write your own blog. You could do these things for social media. You could really take advantage, things that we actually couldn't do back then. Now you could do and get your voice in there and your photos and your videos. And it means so much. I love to look at that stuff. Before I went to Puglia, we went to Puglia this summer, and I kept getting, like, they kept feeding me information on my Instagram of all these like trips in Puglia. And I was just mesmerized by it. It was like I was watching like literally a movie on TV.
Yeah. And also I think we learn more about the nuances of what we thought we understood about a region. Unless you mentioned Italy, of course, and Puglia, how the foods of Puglia are completely different from, let's say, the foods of Milan. It makes sense because Puglia is right there on the water, right there, on the Mediterranean. And one thing I learned, which again, I just love being like surprised and amazed, shocked and amazed by fun facts on food, right? I think we all do. And I was in Sicily and I'm like, there was no Parmesan cheese. We think, oh, Italian food, we'll pass wants the Parmesan cheese. I think, no, it's just, I'm sure you could have gotten it if you asked for it because it's modern era. But they're like, no, we don't use Parmesan cheese here in Sicily because classically we had no dairy. The cows are in the north of Italy, and that is where you'd have your, Parmesan Reggiano and the buffalo milk mozzarellas and, all that jazz. But in Sicily, what they had on top of the pasta, which had the umami and had that zippity doodah, if you will, that a Parmesan cheese would have, was seasoned breadcrumbs. Because what they had was wheat. What they had was, we're making the pasta out of. And it was so funny. I kept thinking of like, oh my gosh, these carb fearing Americans would freak out. First of all, I'm eating pasta. Oh my gosh, I'm eating pasta. And they have potatoes too. Then on top of the potatoes, they put the seasoned breadcrumbs. On top of the pasta, seasoned breadcrumbs. Okay. And it just added flavor and crunch. And again, the umami, because it was a certain way they did it. So, there's a world of endless food facts. I mean, there's ingredients. I was in the Caribbean. I don't remember which islands. I'm like, I thought I knew about tropical fruits and vegetables. I thought I'd seen them all. I mean, my first TV jobs, I was in South Florida and went to all the, tropical gardens and learned about cherimoya and all that stuff. And there's still things that I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
So I think that's exciting.
Yeah, there's so much to discover, and so much to write about, and so much to really appreciate about other cultures. It's not just about, the food, but it's also how they live, how they bring everyone to the family. Like, I laugh sometimes when they're talking about, the Mediterranean diet. And of course, everybody knows by now what the Mediterranean diet is, but it's not like the Mediterraneans sat around and said, hey, let's write a good diet book. This was just the way that they lived. And I think that that's the big difference with the way that we live. We want to pick a food that's going to be like magical for us But, one that's like asking you to play the music of an orchestra with one instrument. No, you need the whole conglomeration of all the foods that are put together. And, that's what we see a lot when we travel. So yes.
And it's fun to go to big cities because so many different, I'm sorry to interrupt, but big cities where there's so many different cuisines are represented because there's so many immigrants from around the world or people who've moved to that city from around the world. And you get a chance to sample their cuisine or the version of their cuisine, whether it's in London or New York.
Yeah. People who, and for anyone who doesn't travel, doesn't like to travel, can't travel, whatever it may be, you could do this in your own city. You could go on, I love to go on walking tours in New York. So you could go on a walking tour in your own city and explore the different cuisines of different neighborhoods. So you don't have to necessarily have the budget to travel. You could just really do it right in your own backyard. So that's another thing to do. Anyway, so, switching gears, a lot of dietitians that I counsel, because in my media training business, I see a lot of people who are very, very, very talented, and yet they feel like they don't have the confidence to get out there. So for those dietitians who are feeling overwhelmed, or healthcare professionals who are feeling overwhelmed, feeling like they want to be everything and everywhere, what kind of advice could you give them?
Listen to the person that is asking the questions very carefully, because it shows that you are responding to them as a human being. And this is if it's a recorded interview. If you're just by yourself, same kind of a thing. And that's that authenticity again. When you're just, let's say, as the host or delivering a message on social media or in a video that you're recording, just try to imagine, like when I was on TV, you try to imagine the people out there and, don't think about who the experts are who are listening to you and you feel like, oh, they're going to criticize me because I didn't explain calcium correctly. Think of somebody like, your sister-in-law, your neighbor, a friend who needs, we all have financial divas in our lives. So you're the nutrition diva, the diet diva, if you will. So think of those people and don't have in the back of your mind, oh, I might make a mistake, or I got to add the nuance or the qualifiers. This is true, but only if, it just muddies it. Just go for it. And when you give a piece, I know this is going on, but if you give a piece of nutrition advice based on evidence-based research, make sure you give a real life example. Therefore, when you're in the produce section, you might look for foods that are the orange and yellow category to get your beta carotene. Therefore, when you're looking at canned beans in the canned bean aisle, really check out the sodium levels, that kind of a thing. Make sure that you always offer a real life example of something.
You've dropped so many pearls of wisdom during this show that I think a lot of people, if they picked up on it, that's great, but I don't even know if they have. And I just want to highlight a few of them. First of all, you use alliteration so often, and so do I. A big, beautiful bread basket, that kind of, I love it. In fact, my kids were always like rolling their eyes about my titles of stories, but I do love it. And you've used it so many times today. You also used flagging. Let me tell you the 3 things that are most important. Flagging, 100%. But what you just said now is so important is...
Can you remind me what is flagging? Maybe I do it automatically. I don't know what it is.
Flagging is where you're like drawing attention to something, like where you're saying,
if
I could tell you one thing, let me remind you of this. It's sort of like putting something in bold. So you've done it. You've done it so many times today, and you're so used to doing these things that you don't even think about it. But what you just said is really important, because the more that you look at a reporter's face and really listen to what they're saying, the more comfortable you'll feel, because you're talking to a person and you're not talking to the audience. Even though, yes, I always say talk in the language of the audience. Right now, during this interview, you're just trying to help this person. So that's a great tip. So if you could go back, what kind of advice would you give your younger self? What's one thing that you would tell your younger self sitting at that desk at CNN? What would you say?
Buy Apple stock. If I could go back to 1982, yeah, buy Apple, buy Google.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, like, we work so hard, we tend to just have our head down. No, of course I do mean that, but I didn't do that. Um, uh, I'll tell you what it is. We often think that what we're talking about is the most important thing in the world because we care about food and nutrition. And this is what I would tell my younger self. People don't think it's as important as we do. People don't care as much about this as we do. Now, of course, that's our job to get excited about it. I was on a travel trip. I was in the Galapagos. Okay. And one of the travel writers said to me, Carolyn, I understand you write about food. That must be so limiting. Uh-huh. And I was like, well, wait, what? What do you mean limiting? And I said, well, I understand you write about stand-up paddleboarding. That must be really limiting, But the point is not everybody puts food at the center of their universe like we do. So, yes, I built a career making it the center of my universe and bringing in the audience. And little by little, people, of course, we got more people in the tent, but never assume that people really care what you're talking about. They kind of don't.
Right. You have to make them care, with something that's as attractive as you could make it, or magnetic messages, to use alliteration again.
And again, connect to what they do care about. It might be saving money. It might be having, beautiful clear skin or healthy hair, or like winning a tennis match, or, all those things. But I don't want our time to get away without mentioning how excited I am about your book, which you keep updating.
Thank you.
Read it before you eat it, taking you from label to table. And this is endlessly fascinating to people. Anytime you mention, this is a good tip. Anytime you can throw in the term expiration date, back to that audience, they're all ears. Okay. Even if it has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Okay. Make sure you mention that. And, but anyway, and then of course the rules keep changing and the foods keep changing. So there's a lot of great wisdom. Then another thing I want to show in our show and tell here is a brand new book that I have written with a team. And I just really think this is a great example, Bonnie. Even though I was at CNN and of course my reports reach millions and millions of people around the world, I have this to say. Sometimes the success of a book or project is not reaching the most people. It's reaching the people who need it the most. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Good one.
And this book is called The Copper Conscious Kitchen. This happens to be for folks with Wilson disease who have to limit the amount of copper, which of course is a trace mineral, which is important for good health, but they have to limit the amount of copper in their diet for their good health because they're lacking the genetic trait of metabolizing copper, and it builds up in their brains, it builds up in their liver. So working on this book with several other dietitian colleagues, including those at Yale, Texas Children's, this was a labor of love, working on recipes, but also charts of foods with their copper content. And we think of, look at a nutrition facts label back to, read the label. There's no copper listed anywhere on of course, nutrition facts. So we really had to use our dietitian detective work to really look for copper content in things and to give people the most complete charts so that not just the recipes, because that's, recipes paint by number, but if you give people the tools like the charts and how to shop and how to order at a restaurant, then they can go beyond that. So again, sometimes it's not about reaching the most people. So don't get upset if you don't have a bunch of likes or a bunch of shares. It's about reaching the people who need it the most. And that's, I think, what matters most.
That's a great soundbite. I love that. I love that soundbite. That would be great to say at the end of a speech. Perfect. And, speaking of expiration dates, I just want to thank you so much, first of all, for mentioning my book. That's so nice and unexpected. But you are one of those people that never go out of style. And you just keep up with the times. I really want to thank you so much for being on my show. I loved our conversation. I hope the next time I actually see you in person with some cocktails. But thank you so much, Carolyn. I really enjoyed talking to you. Can't wait to get on your show. Could you tell us just a little bit about where people could find you and what your podcast is? called?
Yes. All the kids are doing it. I have a podcast which I launched earlier this year in 2025, and it's called Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neil, and it is seeking the very best in food, nutrition, and cuisine. We cover it all. From pate to pesticides,
There you go. Alliteration again.
anything and everything, and it's like, we like to watch food trends and see what's in and what's out and why. We like to tell you what to watch out for your body and your budget. And then we like to watch, beautiful foods come together around the world and talk about cuisine and all the deliciousness. So it is Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neil. It's on the Spoon Podcast Network, and you can find it on all the places I guess you're supposed to look, like Apple and Spotify and all that good stuff. And if you go to my website, CarolynO'Neil.com, and you'll see media. It says podcasts, and you can just click on that and access it there. Very easy peasy. And Bonnie, I do look forward to having you on the show for sure. And we are going to read it before we eat it. And we're going to do a little diet detective work and find out what is going on in the great big world of supermarkets and food information and fiber.
Oh my God, so excited.
Oh, I'm going to tee you up because guess what, folks? This is kind of a little teaser. You can find the fiber content on Nutrition Facts, but it doesn't tell you soluble fiber, doesn't tell you how much insoluble fiber, doesn't tell you prebiotic fiber. We might have to get a little more specific. We got to read between the lines.
Yes, and just in case
how to do it.
And just in case anybody's dying to know about fiber, my story that I just wrote for Eating Well came out yesterday. It's all about fiber maxing. And whether that's good for you or not, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that, but I'm just going to let you know. It's kind of not to have more than you need, but anyway.
Guess what? And with Wilson disease and copper, here's another thing I learned, is that they, plant-based foods and a lot of fibers will actually prevent some of the micronutrients from being absorbed. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing if you have Wilson disease. Okay. Who knew? So
who knew?
It's all about the personal nutrition guidance for where people are and what they need.
Yes. From us. So listen. If you love this show, then please let me know. I read every one of your comments. Please hit subscribe and let me know what you think. If you need to connect with me, you could always find me on Instagram, even though I'm not always there. But anyway, I'll find a message.
You can reach out to me, and then I'll get you in touch with Bonnie.
So I'm at BTD Media on Instagram. And I just want to say thank you for joining us today. I hope you had as much fun as we did. And by the way, you are looking mighty media savvy. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye.